99 men are alive in a steel tube 400 miles southwest of the Azores, going about their routine with the confident casualness of veterans who believe they are safe. It is the afternoon of May 22, 1968, and the Atlantic Ocean is about to claim a debt that physics demands must be paid. This is the story of a sound that traveled across the ocean floor before anyone on the surface knew to listen for it, marking the end of a vessel that was dead long before it was declared missing. To understand the final 22 minutes of the USS Scorpion, one must first understand the silence that surrounds it. In the Cold War of the late 1960s, the ocean is not an empty wilderness. It is a wired room. The United States Navy has deployed a vast secret network of hydrophones known as the Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS. These listening posts, anchored to the seabed and connected by miles of cable to shore stations, are designed to track the low-frequency hum of Soviet submarines. They are the ears of the West, constantly filtering the background noise of whales, shipping traffic, and seismic tremors in search of the enemy. On this particular Wednesday in May, the SOSUS sensors pick up a series of anomalous signals. They are not the rhythmic churning of a propeller or the mechanical transient of a missile hatch opening. They are impulsive, violent, and acoustic signatures that do not fit the profile of any known weapon or biological life. The sound waves travel through the deep sound channel, a layer of water that acts as a natural fiber optic cable for noise, preserving the energy of the event over thousands of miles. The sensors record the data mechanically, etching the tragedy onto paper charts that will not be fully analyzed for days. The men in the shore stations do not know it yet, but they are listening to a death rattle. The signals represent a timeline of destruction that is absolute and irreversible. While the families of the crew are preparing for the submarine's scheduled return to Norfolk, Virginia, the physics of the event have already concluded. The official timeline of the Navy will eventually list the submarine as missing, then presumed lost, initiating a frantic search of the surface. But the real timeline, the one written in acoustic energy, tells a different story. The Scorpion does not vanish into a mystery. She is dismantled by a sequence of specific mechanical failures that begin with a single spark. We move now from the listening posts on the edge of the ocean to the interior of the vessel itself, rewinding the clock to the start of the final sequence. It is 22 minutes before the end. The USS Scorpion is operating at periscope depth, just beneath the surface of the rolling Atlantic swells. She is returning from a deployment in the Mediterranean, a long transit home that should be the safest part of the journey. The tactical state of the ship is relaxed but alert. There are no Soviet destroyers hunting her. There are no torpedoes in the water. The captain, Commander Francis Slattery, has the boat in a standard operational alignment. However, the crew has set Condition Baker. In submarine doctrine, this is a readiness state often used during maintenance or specific maneuvers. It involves closing watertight doors and isolating specific compartments to prevent the spread of flooding or fire. It is a safety measure, a precaution designed to protect the ship. In a cruel twist of irony, this condition, meant to save the vessel, contributes to the isolation of the crew during the coming crisis. It segments the boat, turning the long tube into a series of sealed steel chambers. The Scorpion is a Skipjack-class nuclear submarine designed for speed and agility. She is shaped like a teardrop, a hydrodynamic marvel that handles like a fighter jet underwater. But beneath her sleek skin, she is a tired machine. The atmosphere inside the boat is heavy and humid. The air conditioning systems, notorious for their unreliability, struggle to strip the moisture from the air. The boat smells of ozone, diesel oil, and the sour tang of 99 men living in close quarters. She is a ship that has been ridden hard. The Navy's operational commitments in the late 1960s are immense, driven by the pressures of the Cold War and the shadow of the Vietnam War. To keep submarines at sea, maintenance schedules are often compressed. The Scorpion has a reputation among the fleet as a scrap iron boat, a vessel plagued by hydraulic leaks and persistent mechanical gremlins. The crew works tirelessly to keep her running, using ingenuity to patch over the deficits of funding and time. Deep in the forward section of the submarine, beneath the living quarters and the operations spaces, lies the battery well. Even a nuclear submarine relies on batteries. They are the backup power source, a massive bank of lead-acid cells capable of running the ship's vital systems if the nuclear reactor scrammed or the steam turbines failed. These batteries are heavy, dangerous, and chemically volatile. The charging process for these massive cells is a delicate chemical operation. As electricity flows into the lead plates, the batteries release hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is the lightest element in the universe, odorless, colorless, and terrifyingly flammable. On a surface ship, hydrogen can simply vent into the atmosphere. Inside a submerged submarine, it is a trapped assassin. The ship relies on air recirculation fans and specialized burners to remove the gas, keeping the concentration below the explosive limit of 4%, but the Scorpion's ventilation system is compromised. The same maintenance deferrals that plague the hydraulics also affect the air scrubbers. If the fans are not moving enough air, or if a pocket of dead air forms in the high corners of the battery well, hydrogen can accumulate. It gathers in the dark spaces, pooling against the overhead, waiting for an ignition source. At the 18-minute mark, something sparks. It might be a sailor throwing a switch to disconnect a charging cable. It might be a static discharge from a uniform. It might be a loose connection vibrating against a steel stanchion. The exact source is immaterial. The result is instantaneous. A flash of blue fire rips through the battery well. The explosion is not the Hollywood fireball that consumes the entire ship. It is a low-order detonation, constrained by the heavy steel walls of the battery compartment. The pressure wave hammers against the bulkheads, traveling at the speed of sound. In the confined space, the overpressure is lethal to anyone standing nearby. The sailors tending the batteries are likely incapacitated or killed instantly, their lungs and eardrums shattered by the concussion. However, the hull of the submarine, the HY-80 steel skin that holds back the ocean, remains intact. The explosion is not strong enough to blow a hole in the outer shell. The Scorpion is still a watertight vessel. She is still buoyant. She is still under command. But the explosion has done something far more insidious than breach the hull. It has compromised the internal integrity of the ship's piping and hatch seals. The shockwave jars the heavy dogging mechanisms of the access hatches. It fractures hydraulic lines and seawater cooling pipes running through the compartment. In the confusion of the smoke and the alarm, a path is opened. The barrier between the interior of the submarine and the infinite ocean outside is breached, not by a tear in the steel, but by the failure of a seal. To understand why this internal failure is a death sentence, one must look back at the decisions made years before the Scorpion ever sailed on this final patrol. The history of the submarine force is written in regulations that usually follow disasters. 5 years earlier, in 1963, the USS Thresher had been lost with all hands during a deep diving test. That tragedy revealed catastrophic flaws in how the Navy built and operated its nuclear boats. In response, the Navy initiated the Submarine Safety Program, or SubSafe. This program mandated rigorous quality assurance, the redesign of critical systems, and the installation of emergency seawater shutoff valves that could be operated hydraulically from the control room. SubSafe was designed to ensure that if a pipe burst or a seal failed, the crew could isolate the leak in seconds. The Scorpion, however, was not fully SubSafe certified. As naval historians like Ed Offley have noted, the strategic demands of the era forced the Navy to make calculated risks. The Scorpion was due for a massive, expensive overhaul to bring her up to the new standards. But the shipyards were full, the budget was tight, and the fleet needed every available hull in the water to track the expanding Soviet Navy. Instead of a full overhaul, the Scorpion received a reduced availability maintenance period. It was a stopgap measure. It cost 1/7 of a full overhaul and took a fraction of the time. Critical upgrades were deferred. The emergency shutoff valves for the seawater systems were not modernized. The systems that were supposed to save the ship in the event of flooding were left in their legacy state, manual, slow, and difficult to reach in an emergency. So, as the smoke clears in the battery well, and the survivors in the adjacent compartment scramble to assess the damage, they are fighting a battle with one hand tied behind their backs. The safety net that should have been there, the hydraulic levers in the control room that could snap valves shut instantly, does not exist. The explosion has shocked the ship, but it has not killed it. The submarine is still at periscope depth. The reactor is likely still online. The propeller is still turning. The tragedy is that the event is survivable. If the crew can isolate the damage, vent the smoke, and seal the leak, they can surface. They are only minutes away from fresh air and radio contact. But the chain of causality has been forged. The localized explosion has created a vulnerability in the battery well, a space that is now filled with smoke, debris, and the groans of injured men. And somewhere in that darkness, obscured by the chaos, a stream of high-pressure seawater begins to hiss. It starts as a spray, a mist of atomized salt water entering the compartment through a failed fitting or a jarred hatch seal. The water is cold and relentless. It sprays onto the battery banks, which are still electrically live. When salt water mixes with the sulfuric acid of the batteries and the electrical current of the bus bars, it creates a toxic, conductive sludge. More importantly, it creates a short circuit that can arc with the power of a lightning bolt. The 18-minute mark passes. The initial event is over. The echoes of the explosion fade into the steel ribs of the ship. The crew of the Scorpion, trained and disciplined, begins to react. They move to general quarters. They grab fire extinguishers and damage control kits. They believe they are dealing with a fire and a medical emergency. They do not yet realize that the true enemy is not the fire, but the water. The ocean has found a way in. The weight of the ship is beginning to change. The delicate balance of buoyancy that keeps the 2,500-ton vessel suspended near the surface is being disturbed, pound by pound, gallon by gallon. The submarine is not dead yet, but the clock has started and the margin for error has vanished. The decisions made in budget meetings years ago are now manifesting as physical realities in the forward compartment. The Scorpion is wounded, she is blind in the smoke, and she is beginning to get heavy. In the sealed environment of a submarine, seawater is not merely a flooding hazard, it is a chemical antagonist. As the saltwater spray hisses into the battery well of the USS Scorpion, the crisis transforms instantly from a structural problem into a toxicological nightmare. The water, drawn in by the immense pressure of the Atlantic even at shallow depths, bridges the gap between the massive electrical bus bars. The result is violent and immediate. The salt water acts as a conductor, completing circuits that were never meant to be connected. Arcs of electricity, bright as welding torches, snap through the smoke. But the greater danger is invisible. When salt water mixes with the sulfuric acid of the lead-acid batteries, it generates chlorine gas. It is a heavy, yellow-green vapor, the same agent used in the trenches of the First World War. It attacks the lungs, burning the respiratory system and blinding the eyes. The men in the forward compartment are now fighting a three-front war. They are battling the fire ignited by the hydrogen explosion, they are struggling to stem the ingress of the ocean, and they are choking on air that is rapidly turning into poison. The progression of the flooding is deceptive. To a layman, a leak might seem manageable, something to be patched or pumped. But in naval architecture, weight is the arbiter of survival. The Scorpion is designed to operate with neutral buoyancy, hanging in the water column like a balloon in the air. Every cubic foot of seawater that enters the hull adds 64 pounds of dead weight. 100 gallons is 800 pounds. 1,000 gallons is nearly 4 tons. The pumps on the Scorpion are powerful, but they are fighting a losing equation. The water is entering under pressure, filling the bilges, soaking the lagging, and creeping into the cable runs. The submarine begins to lose its equilibrium. The perfect balance calculated by the diving officer is destroyed. The bow feels heavy. The ship begins to sluggishly respond to the helm, like a car with 4 flat tires. In the control room, located just above the chaos of the battery well, the response is professional and drilled. There is no panic, only a heightened, clipped exchange of data. The frantic energy is channeled into procedure. The order is given to isolate the forward compartment. Watertight doors are slammed shut and dogged down. This act, necessary to save the ship, seals the fate of anyone trapped on the wrong side. It is the brutal calculus of the sea, sacrifice the few to save the many. However, isolating the compartment does not stop the water. The leak is likely coming from a seawater cooling line or a penetration in the hull that feeds the battery well's cooling system. To stop the water, the crew must close the main induction valves and the hull stop valves. Here, the tragedy of the Scorpion moves from the realm of accident to the realm of institutional failure. On a modern, sub-safe certified submarine, these critical valves would be hydraulic. A sailor in the control room could flip a switch, and a massive hydraulic ram would snap the valve shut in milliseconds, cutting off the ocean's access to the ship's interior. But the Scorpion does not have this system. Her valves are manual. They are large, heavy steel wheels that must be turned by hand. Worse, these valves are located near the equipment they serve. To close the valve that is feeding the leak, a sailor must physically enter the battery well area. He must walk into the smoke, the fire, and the chlorine gas. He must find a handwheel obscured by debris and turn it, fighting the friction of a system that has not been properly overhauled in years. It is a task that demands superhuman courage, but courage alone cannot overcome physics. If the sailor cannot reach the valve, or if the heat is too intense, the water continues to flow. The ocean keeps entering, adding ton after ton of mass to the submarine. As the crew struggles with the valves, another option is exercised: the emergency blow. The captain orders the main ballast tanks to be blown. This is the submarine's parachute. High-pressure air is injected into the ballast tanks to force out the water and drive the ship to the surface. The roar of the air system vibrates through the hull. The crew waits for the sensation of lift, the upward lurch that signals safety, but the rise is sluggish. The Scorpion is heavy, and she is getting heavier by the second. The air banks, while functional, are fighting against the increasing mass of the floodwater. The ship is struggling to climb, her propeller churning the water, her planes angled for maximum lift, but gravity is beginning to win. To understand why the Scorpion is fighting this battle with obsolete equipment, one must step back from the smoke-filled control room and look at a decision made in a dry dock in Norfolk, Virginia, 1 year earlier. In 1967, the Scorpion was due for a full refueling overhaul. This is a massive industrial undertaking that involves cutting the hull, replacing the nuclear fuel, and upgrading every system to the latest standards. It was supposed to be the moment the Scorpion received the full suite of sub-safe safety features mandated after the loss of the USS Thresher. But 1967 was a year of immense pressure for the United States Navy. The war in Vietnam was consuming budgets and manpower at a voracious rate. The Cold War in the Atlantic was heating up, with Soviet submarines becoming faster, quieter, and more aggressive. The Navy needed hulls in the water. They could not afford to have a nuclear attack submarine sitting in dry dock for 2 years. The decision was made to cancel the full overhaul. Instead, the Scorpion underwent a reduced availability maintenance period. The difference was stark. A full overhaul would have cost approximately $20 million. The reduced availability cost just over $3 million. It was a bargain basement refit for a frontline warship. During this abbreviated maintenance, critical safety upgrades were deferred. The emergency seawater shutoff valves, the very valves the crew is now desperately trying to close, were not modernized. The emergency blow system was not upgraded to the high-capacity design that could clear ballast tanks in seconds. The ultrasonic inspection of the piping joints was limited. The Navy leadership at the time justified this as a calculated risk. They certified the Scorpion as safe for operations, but they placed restrictions on her depth. They knew she was not a perfect ship. They knew she was tired, but they needed her on the line. The Scorpion was sent back to sea with a clean coat of paint and a list of deferred maintenance items that would fill a phone book. Now, 400 miles southwest of the Azores, the bill for that $3 million savings has come due. The physical consequences of the reduced availability are manifesting in real time. As the water fills the forward spaces, the Scorpion loses her trim. The bow dips. The submarine, which had been maintaining periscope depth, begins to slide downward. It is not a plunge, not yet. It is a slow, sickening drift. The depth gauge, which had been steady at 50 feet, begins to tick downward: 60 feet, 80 feet, 100 feet. The crew in the control room sees the numbers changing. They apply full rise on the fairwater planes. They order flank speed, trying to use the submarine's engine power to fly the ship to the surface like an airplane taking off. The nuclear reactor is roaring. The screw is biting into the water, generating immense thrust. For a moment, it might seem like they have a chance. The descent slows. The ship shudders as the hydrodynamic forces fight against the dead weight of the water. But the flooding has not stopped. The manual valves are still open. The chlorine gas is still spreading. Amidst this chaos, there is a conspicuous absence, a distress signal. In the popular imagination, a submarine in trouble immediately radios for help. In reality, the physics of radio waves make this nearly impossible during an evolving crisis. Radio waves do not penetrate deep water. To send a message, the Scorpion must raise a mast above the surface or float a specialized buoy. But the Scorpion is no longer at the surface. She has slipped beneath the waves. To send a distress signal now, the crew would have to slow the ship to release a buoy or maneuver to a specific depth to use the underwater telephone. Captain Slattery and his officers do not have the luxury of time. Every second is devoted to keeping the ship from sinking. Stopping to send a radio message means taking attention away from the ballast controls, the propulsion, and the damage control parties. They are wrestling a dying Leviathan. They believe, as all submariners are trained to believe, that they can save the ship. They prioritize survival over communication. So, the Scorpion fights alone. There is no mayday breaking the static of the Atlantic airwaves. There is no message to the carrier group in Norfolk. There is only the internal comm circuit, filled with the reports of flooding levels and the coughing of men in the forward compartment. The timeline has reached the 14-minute mark remaining. The submarine has passed 150 feet. She is heavy, bow down, and picking up speed. The ocean is no longer just leaking in. It is beginning to embrace the hull. The pressure outside is increasing, which forces the water through the breach even faster. It is a feedback loop of destruction. The Scorpion has transitioned from a submarine operating under its own power to a falling object fighting against gravity. The men inside are doing everything right. They are following their training. They are brave, competent, and focused. But they are operating a machine that was denied the tools it needed to survive this specific failure. The reduced availability was a bureaucratic success in 1967. It saved money. It saved time. It got the ship back to sea. But in 1968, in the deep Atlantic, it is the reason the water cannot be stopped. The submarine begins to tilt steeper, sliding away from the light of the surface, heading for the crushing dark that waits below. Gravity is a law that negotiates with buoyancy, and at 14 minutes remaining, the negotiation inside the USS Scorpion has failed. The submarine has crossed an invisible threshold known to naval architects as the point of no return. She is no longer a vessel navigating the ocean. She has become a falling object, a 2,500-ton stone slipping through the water column with terrifying, accelerating momentum. The physics of a sinking submarine are counterintuitive. On the surface, a ship sinks because it fills with water until it disappears. Underwater, the process is dynamic and exponential. As the Scorpion descends past 400 feet, the pressure of the Atlantic squeezes the hull. The high-yield steel compresses, shrinking the diameter of the boat by fractions of an inch. This might seem negligible, but in the precise mathematics of buoyancy, it is fatal. As the hull shrinks, it displaces less water. As it displaces less water, it becomes less buoyant. The deeper the Scorpion falls, the heavier she effectively becomes, even without taking on another drop of floodwater. In the control room, the crew is fighting a battle against this compounding math. Captain Francis Slattery and his diving officer are applying every ounce of energy the ship possesses to arrest the descent. The nuclear reactor is running at full power, the steam turbines are screaming, and the single massive propeller is churning the water, driving the ship forward at maximum speed. The strategy is akin to flying an airplane with a heavy load. If they can generate enough speed, the fairwater planes on the sail and the stern planes at the rear can act like wings, generating hydrodynamic lift to pull the nose up and fly the ship back to the surface. The control room team hauls back on the yokes, setting the planes to full rise. The ship shudders violently as the water rushes over the control surfaces. For a heartbeat, the descent rate might shallow. The unparalleled power of the Westinghouse S5W nuclear reactor is fighting the dead weight of the ocean. But the drag is immense. The Scorpion is now bow-heavy, dragging tons of water in her forward compartments. The angle of the deck becomes steep, forcing men to grab stanchions and consoles to stay upright. Loose gear, clipboards, coffee cups, tools begins to slide, clattering against the bulkheads, adding a soundtrack of chaos to the hum of the engines. The gauges tell a story that no submariner ever wants to see. The depth is increasing. 500 feet, 600 feet. The speed is high, but the vector is wrong. They are driving fast, but they are driving down. This is the moment of command realization. It is the instant when the training scenarios end and the reality of the situation solidifies in the minds of the officers. They have blown the ballast. They have applied full power. They have set full rise on the planes. They have done everything the manual dictates, and the ocean is not letting go. The instruments, usually the trusted arbiters of their world, are now delivering a verdict of doom. While the men in the control room stare at the depth gauges, the timeline of the tragedy splits. There is the timeline inside the hull, measured in seconds and PSI, and there is the timeline on the surface, measured in calendars and ignorance. 3,000 miles away, at Pier 22 in Norfolk, Virginia, the timeline is frozen in a state of mundane anticipation. It is Wednesday, May 22nd. The families of the Scorpion crew are marking off the days on their kitchen calendars. The submarine is scheduled to return on Monday, May 27th at 1:00 p.m. The Navy wives are engaged in the rituals of homecoming. They are buying groceries for welcome home dinners. They are ironing dresses. Children are making signs with crayons and poster board. There is a specific nervous energy that permeates a Navy town when a boat is due back. It is a mix of relief and excitement, the knowledge that the long separation is almost over. At this exact moment, while a wife in Norfolk might be parking her car at the commissary or picking up a phone to call her mother, her husband is 400 feet down in the Atlantic, watching the hull frames groan under the load. The juxtaposition is brutal. The families are living in a future that has already been canceled. They are waiting for ghosts. The disconnect between the dying men and the waiting families creates a moral weight that hangs over the entire story of the Scorpion. The tragedy is not just the death of the men, it is the delay of the truth. Back inside the hull, the descent passes 800 feet. The Scorpion is now entering the realm of test depth. This is the deepest the submarine is certified to go during peacetime operations. It is the limit of the safety margin. Beyond this depth, the hull is strong enough to survive, but the systems are not guaranteed. The sounds inside the boat change. The hull begins to talk. As the pressure mounts, the steel ribs compress and shift. Loud pops and bangs, sounding like gunshots, echo through the ship. This is the sound of metal yielding to physics. To a rookie, it is terrifying. To a veteran, it is a warning. The ship is screaming under the load. The crew attempts final, desperate measures to shed weight. They try to pump the bilges, forcing water out against the crushing external pressure. But the pumps are rated for specific depths. As the Scorpion goes deeper, the back pressure from the ocean overpowers the pumps. The water inside the ship is trapped. The flooding in the battery well, which started the catastrophe, is now a permanent part of the ship's mass. The rudder is jammed or ineffective. Some acoustic analysis suggests the Scorpion might have entered a tight spiral, a death spin induced by the hydrodynamic imbalance. The centrifugal force would pin the men against the bulkheads, adding physical disorientation to the psychological terror. By the 10-minute mark remaining, the submarine passes 1,000 feet. The operational ceiling is shattered. They are now in the forbidden zone. The environment inside the engineering spaces remains functional. The reactor, encased in its own heavy shielding, continues to produce power. The lights are likely still on. The air conditioning fans are still spinning. This creates a surreal horror. The machine is working perfectly, but it is trapped in a trajectory that leads only to destruction. The men in the engine room, aft of the control center, are alive and uninjured. They are watching their gauges, listening to the commands from the bridge, feeling the steep angle of the deck. They know they are deep. They know they are heavy. But they are isolated from the flooding in the bow. They are passengers in a vehicle that is being pulled down by its own nose. The failure of the Scorpion is often framed as a mystery. But at this stage of the descent, the mystery dissolves into a clear indictment of the system. The submarine is falling because she was denied the modernization that would have allowed her to surface. The reduced availability overhaul did not just save money, it removed the margin for error. If the Scorpion had possessed the high-capacity emergency blow system installed on newer boats, the ballast tanks would have emptied in seconds, providing enough buoyancy to snap the ship to the surface even with the flooding. If she had possessed the hydraulic seawater shutoff valves, the leak would have been isolated before the weight became fatal. The men fighting gravity at 1,200 feet are not fighting alone. They are fighting the ghosts of budget committees and procurement boards. They are fighting the strategic decision to prioritize hull numbers over hull safety. The Scorpion was not sunk, by a mysterious enemy or a rogue wave. She was allowed to fall by a chain of institutional compromises that began years before the first spark in the battery well. As the depth gauge sweeps past 1,300 feet, the crew knows that the end is not a possibility. It is a certainty. The hull creates a groaning, continuous shriek as the pressure exceeds 600 pounds per square inch. The ocean is squeezing the ship with the weight of a freight train on every square foot. The realization spreads through the boat. There are no more checklists to run. There are no more valves to turn. The planes are at full rise and the ship is still sinking. The propulsion is at full power and the ship is still sinking. The panic of the initial explosion and the frantic activity of damage control give way to a terrifying clarity. They are going to crush depth. The ocean floor is miles below them, but the limit of the steel is much closer. In the final minutes of the fall, the Scorpion becomes a test chamber for the human capacity to endure the inevitable. The men do not abandon their posts. There is nowhere to go. They stand at their stations, holding the rails, watching the needles spin. They are professionals to the end, doing their jobs even as the world around them begins to buckle. The submarine passes 1,400 feet. The hull is now under such immense stress that the hatches are jammed into their frames with thousands of tons of force. The sea valves are holding back a pressure that wants to atomize the interior. The Scorpion is a bubble of air falling through a universe of water, and the bubble is about to burst. There is a specific, terrifying silence that descends upon a submarine when the crew realizes that human agency has been exhausted. For the first 10 minutes of the crisis, the interior of the USS Scorpion was a cacophony of shouted orders, the hiss of hydraulic rams, the roar of high-pressure air, and the clang of damage control tools. It was a noise defined by resistance. The men were fighting the ocean, believing that if they pulled the right lever or turned the right valve, the ship would respond. But as the timeline enters the window between minute 12 and minute 17, the noise changes. The frantic energy of the struggle dissipates because there are no more levers to pull. The ballast tanks are blown, but the ship is heavy. The propulsion is at maximum, but the ship is sinking. The planes are at full rise, but the angle is down. The machinery of the submarine is still running, the reactor is humming, the lights are burning, the ventilation fans are whirring, but the vessel has ceased to be a machine under command. It has become a prisoner of gravity. This period is the long wait. It is the most psychological and harrowing phase of the disaster. It is the time when 99 men, trapped in a steel tube sliding into the abyss, must confront the inevitability of their own extinction while they are still fully conscious, uninjured, and standing at their posts. The depth gauge is now the only instrument that matters. It is moving steadily past 1,400 feet. The Scorpion is now deeper than any American submarine is ever supposed to go. She has passed her test depth, past her safety margin, and is entering the structural twilight zone, where the engineer's calculations end and the raw strength of the metal begins. The hull of the Scorpion is made of HY80 steel, an alloy formulated to yield at 80,000 pounds per square inch. It is incredibly tough, capable of flexing and compressing under the weight of the ocean. As the pressure mounts, the hull begins to sing. It creates a high-pitched, groaning vibration that resonates through the deck plates. It sounds like the ship is in pain. Every bolt, every weld, every seam is being subjected to a force that wants to crush it into a sphere. The popping sounds, loud, violent cracks that sound like pistol shots, become frequent. These are not failures, not yet. They are the sound of the hull frame shifting, the metal compressing as the diameter of the submarine shrinks by inches under the squeezing fist of the Atlantic. In the engine room, located in the aft section of the boat, the experience is particularly surreal. These men are far removed from the flooding in the battery well. They have not seen the fire or the smoke. To them, the ship looks normal. The turbines are spinning. The gauges show green lights. The only indication that the world is ending is the steep downward angle of the deck and the relentless climb of the depth repeater. They stand at the throttles, holding onto the rails to keep from sliding forward. They look at each other. There is no need for speeches. In the tight-knit community of the submarine service, there is a shared, unspoken understanding of the physics of survival. They know what the crushed depth is. They know how deep they are. They can do the math in their heads. It is in these minutes of waiting that the ghost of another ship enters the narrative. 5 years earlier, in April 1963, the USS Thresher had disintegrated off the coast of New England. Every man on the Scorpion knows the story of the Thresher. It is the foundational trauma of their profession. They know that the Thresher sank because of a piping failure and an inability to blow ballast, the exact same sequence of events that is currently killing the Scorpion. The tragedy is that the Scorpion should have been immune to this fate. The loss of the Thresher had birthed the SubSafe program, a rigorous, expensive, and exhaustive overhaul protocol designed to ensure that no submarine would ever again be lost to a flooding casualty. SubSafe mandated hydraulic emergency valves. It mandated high-capacity air systems. It mandated ultrasonic testing of every single pipe joint. But as the Scorpion falls through the darkness at 1,500 feet, the crew is paying the price for the Navy's strategic gamble. Because of the Vietnam War, because of the budget cuts, because of the desperate need to keep hulls in the water against the Soviets, the Scorpion was not fully SubSafe certified. She was a pre-Thresher design operating in a post-Thresher world. The men in the control room are fighting with tools that the Navy already knew were inadequate. They are trying to close valves by hand that should have been hydraulic. They are trying to blow ballast with a system that is too slow to overcome the flooding rate. They are dying not because they are incompetent, but because they are operating a legacy system that was deemed good enough for one last patrol. The irony is suffocating. The lessons that could have saved them were already written in the manuals. They just weren't welded into the steel of their specific ship. As minute 15 ticks by, the descent accelerates. The submarine is likely falling at a speed of several knots vertically. The air inside the boat is compressing slightly as the hull squeezes inward, causing ears to pop. The temperature rises as the friction of the water and the compression of the air heat the interior. The human mind reacts to this proximity to death in strange ways. There is rarely panic in the Hollywood sense. Trained crews tend to fall back on procedure. They stare at the dials. They tighten a valve that is already tight. They check a circuit breaker. They seek comfort in the ritual of operation, even when the operation is futile. Captain Slattery, standing on the con, is the focal point of this discipline. He has a wife and children in Norfolk. He knows that in a few minutes they will be widows and orphans. But his duty in this moment is to maintain the cohesion of his crew. He cannot stop the fall, but he can ensure that they die as a crew, not as a mob. The silence from the command circuit is a form of leadership. There are no frantic screams for help because there is no one to hear them. The ocean outside is absolute night. At this depth, no sunlight has penetrated for millions of years. The only light comes from the bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures, tiny sparks of blue and green that streak past the hull like stars in hyperspace. The Scorpion is an intruder here, a warm, noisy bubble of human technology plunging into a hostile void. By minute 16, the Scorpion passes 1,600 feet. This is the structural red line. The engineering charts predict that the hull will buckle somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 feet, depending on the quality of the welds and the specific alloy batches. The hull is now supporting a weight equivalent to a small car pressing on every square inch of surface area. The viewing ports in the sail, if anyone dared to look through them, would show nothing but blackness pressing against the glass. The seals on the periscopes and antennas are groaning. The crew is trapped in a distortion of time. 5 minutes is usually a short interval, the length of a song, the time it takes to boil water. But inside the falling submarine, 5 minutes is an eternity. It is enough time to think about everything you are leaving behind. It is enough time to regret the argument you had before leaving port. It is enough time to pray. And yet, there is a strange, temporary survivability. The pressure hull is holding. The genius of American metallurgy is on full display. The HY-80 steel is performing exactly as designed, stretching and yielding, buying the crew seconds of life that they cannot use. The ship is stronger than the circumstances, but it is not infinite. The officers in the wardroom, perhaps gathered to discuss the initial damage, are now simply waiting. The men in the mess decks, perhaps playing cards or reading when the alarm sounded, are sitting in silence. The ship tilts steeper. The angle might be 20 or 30 degrees down by the bow now. Walking is impossible. Men are hanging onto bunks and tables. The timeline approaches minute 17. The depth is 1,700 feet. The hull is now compressed to its geometric limit. The steel frames are beginning to buckle microscopically. The perfect circular shape of the hull, which gives it its strength, is deforming. Once the circle breaks, once the hull becomes slightly oval, the collapse will be instantaneous. The SOSUS hydrophones, thousands of miles away, are still recording the ambient noise of the ocean. They hear the Scorpion's engine, they hear the flow noise. But the analysts in the shore stations are about to see the stylus on the chart recorder jump violently. The waiting is almost over. The long wait has exhausted the emotional reserves of the crew. They have passed through fear into a state of adrenaline-fueled clarity. They are deep, they are falling, and they are about to touch the limit of what is physically possible. The Scorpion is no longer a ship returning home. She is a pressure vessel tested to destruction. The tragedy is that the test subjects are men who trusted the Navy to keep them safe. As the minute hand sweeps toward the end of the timeline, the ocean prepares to reclaim the space occupied by the air, the steel, and the souls of the 99. The silence inside the boat is heavy, filled with the breathing of men and the groaning of metal. It is the silence of a held breath before the scream. The descent of the USS Scorpion has now entered the final, terminal phase where the variables of seamanship and courage are replaced by the absolute constants of material science. The submarine has passed the 17-minute mark of the crisis. She is falling through the water column at a depth of 1,500 feet, a region of the Atlantic where the pressure is roughly 680 pounds per square inch. At this depth, the ocean is no longer a fluid medium through which a vessel travels. It is a crushing force that seeks to occupy the space held by the atmosphere inside the hull. The Scorpion is essentially a bubble of air, a void in the water, encased in a shell of HY-80 steel. For the last 5 minutes, that shell has been the only thing keeping 99 men alive. It has flexed, groaned, and compressed, performing a miracle of metallurgical resistance. But every material has a yield point, a specific mathematical threshold where resistance fails and structure collapses. The Scorpion is approaching that threshold. Inside the hull, the environment has become a sensory nightmare. The angle of the deck is likely steep, perhaps 45 degrees down by the bow. The air pressure has increased as the hull compresses, causing ears to pop and temperatures to spike. The sounds of the ship, the high-pitched singing of the steel, the cracking of the frames are deafening. The men are holding on to whatever they can find, suspended in a state of terrified anticipation. They know, with the instinctive knowledge of trained submariners, that they have exceeded the design limits of their world. The engineering calculations for the Skipjack-class suggest a collapse depth of approximately 1,530 feet. This number is an estimate, a theoretical line in the sand based on the thickness of the plating and the quality of the welds. As the Scorpion slides past this depth, she is operating on borrowed time. The hull is now out of round. The immense pressure has squeezed the perfect cylinder into a slightly oval shape. Once this deformation begins, it accelerates. The ocean pushes harder against the flat sides of the oval, weakening the structure exponentially. At 21 minutes and some seconds into the event, the physics of the Atlantic Ocean finally overwhelmed the engineering of the United States Navy. The end of the USS Scorpion does not happen like it does in the movies. There is no slow buckling of the walls, no jets of water slowly filling the room, no final dramatic speeches. The human mind is conditioned to think of disasters as events that unfold over time, but an implosion at crushed depth is an event that happens outside of human time. It occurs in approximately 37 milliseconds. To understand the speed of this violence, one must look at the biology of the human nervous system. It takes the human brain roughly 100 milliseconds to process a sensory input and register it as pain. It takes the eye nearly as long to transmit an image to the visual cortex. The collapse of the Scorpion happens 3 times faster than the human brain can acknowledge that it is happening. When the hull fails, it likely begins at the weakest point, perhaps the battery well access hatch, or the large torpedo loading hatch in the forward section. The failure is instantaneous. The ocean, under 700 pounds of pressure per square inch, smashes the steel inward. The water enters the submarine not as a flood, but as a supersonic ram. It moves at thousands of miles per hour, a solid wall of liquid acting like a piston. The air inside the submarine is compressed instantly. In the physics of gases, rapid compression generates heat, a process known as adiabatic compression. For a fraction of a second, the air inside the Scorpion becomes hot enough to incinerate paper. It essentially turns into a diesel engine cylinder, the atmosphere igniting from the sheer violence of the pressure change. But the men inside do not feel the heat. They do not feel the water. They do not feel the crushing of the steel. They are alive, conscious, and afraid in 1 millisecond, and in the next 37 milliseconds, they simply cease to exist. Their biological existence is extinguished faster than their nerves can transmit the signal of their death. There is no drowning, there is no suffocation. There is only an instantaneous transition from life to silence. It is a terrifying mercy, a death so fast that it is technically painless because the brain never has time to realize it has died. The structural destruction of the submarine is total. The pressure hull does not just crack. It telescopes. The compartments collapse into each other. The operations compartment is driven into the reactor compartment. The torpedo room is crushed backward. The ship is shortened by dozens of feet in the blink of an eye. The violence rips heavy machinery from its mountings. The periscopes, the sonar consoles, the bunks, and the bulkheads are shredded into debris. This catastrophic event releases a massive amount of energy. The collapse of a 2,500-ton hull at that depth creates a shockwave comparable to an underwater explosion of TNT. This energy radiates outward through the deep sound channel, traveling at the speed of sound toward the listening posts of the SOSUS network. Thousands of miles away, on the Canary Islands and in Newfoundland, the styluses on the paper chart recorders jump violently. The analysts watching the drums see a distinct, terrifying signature. It is not the jagged, chaotic noise of a breakup. It is a specific waveform known as a bubble pulse. When the hull implodes, the air inside is compressed into a tiny, high-pressure bubble. This bubble possesses immense potential energy. Once the momentum of the in-rushing water is checked, the bubble explodes outward, expanding rapidly against the water pressure. Then the ocean squeezes it back down. This cycle of expansion and contraction happens several times in quick succession, creating a rhythmic, low-frequency thumping sound that resonates across the ocean basin. To a trained acoustic analyst, the bubble pulse is the fingerprint of death. It confirms that a pressure hull has failed. It confirms that the air volume of the ship has been violently exposed to the sea. It marks the exact second when the Scorpion stopped being a ship and became a wreck. Following the implosion, the silence of the deep returns, but it is a silence filled with falling debris. The Scorpion has been torn into 3 major sections. The bow, containing the torpedo room, has been severed. The stern, containing the engine room, has been ripped away. The massive sail, the conning tower structure, has been sheared off by the hydrodynamic forces of the collapse. These pieces, along with thousands of smaller fragments, piping, insulation, personal effects, and twisted steel, begin the long drift to the bottom. They are falling through another 10,000 feet of water. The journey to the seabed takes perhaps 10 or 15 minutes. The heavy sections, streamlined and dense, plummet straight down, impacting the mud with enough force to bury themselves deep in the silt. The lighter items, papers, clothing, pieces of acoustic tile, drift slowly, carried by the currents, settling gently over a wide area like snow. The reactor compartment, the strongest part of the ship, likely survives the implosion relatively intact. The heavy shielding and the robust construction of the reactor vessel protect the nuclear fuel. It falls to the bottom as a solid unit, a radioactive tombstone settling into the ooze. The safety systems have done their job. There is no nuclear explosion, no massive release of radiation. The reactor sleeps in the dark. But the human toll is absolute. The 99 men who were fighting for their lives moments ago are gone. The spaces where they lived, worked, and slept have been obliterated. The photos of their wives and children, taped to the insides of their lockers, are dissolving in the salt water. The letters they wrote to be mailed upon arrival in Norfolk are drifting in the current. The timeline of the final 22 minutes has run its course. The acoustic event is over. The energy has dissipated. The Atlantic Ocean has reclaimed the space that the Scorpion fought so hard to maintain. On the surface, 400 miles away, the waves continue to roll under the afternoon sun. There is no oil slick yet. There is no debris bobbing on the waves. The implosion happened so deep that the surface remains undisturbed. A passing freighter would see nothing. A patrolling aircraft would see nothing. To the human eye, the ocean looks exactly the same as it did an hour ago. But in the shore stations of the Navy, the data is being collected. The charts are being torn off the drums. The analysts are looking at the squiggles of ink and realizing that something significant has happened. They do not yet know it is the Scorpion. The triangulation will take time. The identification will take time. For now, it is just an acoustic anomaly, a burst of noise in the lonely Atlantic. The disconnect between the reality of the implosion and the awareness of the world is at its peak. The Scorpion is destroyed. Her crew is dead. But for the next 5 days, the Navy will continue to plan for her arrival. The families will continue to mark their calendars. The children will continue to make their signs. The tragedy of the Scorpion is now moving from the physical to the bureaucratic. The submarine has fallen, but the silence, the official, administrative silence, is just beginning. The 22 minutes of struggle are over, replaced by a week of waiting that will inflict a different kind of torture on those left behind. Down in the dark, at a depth of nearly 12,000 feet, the wreck of the Scorpion settles into the mud. The dust clouds raised by the impact slowly clear. The bioluminescent creatures return. The current flows over the shattered steel. The timeline of the ship has ended, and the timeline of the ghost ship has begun. On Monday, May 27, 1968, a heavy gray sky hangs over Pier 22 at the Norfolk Naval Station. It is 1:00 p.m., the scheduled arrival time for the USS Scorpion. The concrete pier is crowded with families. Wives in their Sunday best hold the hands of children who have spent the morning asking if their fathers are bringing them gifts. The mood is expectant, electric with the specific joy of a homecoming. But the horizon is empty. The minutes tick by. 1:15 p.m., 1:30 p.m. The crowd scans the channel, looking for the telltale black shape of a submarine sail breaking the surface of the Elizabeth River. They see nothing but the chop of the water and the movement of harbor tugs. A submarine is rarely late. In the nuclear navy, punctuality is a matter of orbital precision. If a boat is delayed, it radios ahead. Slowly, the atmosphere on the pier shifts from anticipation to confusion and then to a cold, creeping dread. Officers begin to move through the crowd, their faces tight and unreadable. They quietly usher the families into a nearby building, away from the eyes of the press. There is no announcement yet, only the terrifying absence of the ship. What the families do not know, what they will not be officially told for days, is that they are waiting for a ghost. The men they are expecting have been dead for 5 days. The USS Scorpion is not delayed by weather or mechanical trouble. She is lying in pieces on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, 2,000 miles away. The disconnect between the Navy's knowledge and the public's hope is one of the most controversial aspects of the Scorpion tragedy. By Monday, May 27th, the acoustic data from the SOSUS network has already been analyzed. The acoustic anomaly recorded on May 22nd, the violent bubble pulse of an implosion, has been triangulated. High-ranking officers in the Pentagon know that a catastrophic event occurred along the Scorpion's projected track. They know the submarine is lost, yet the search operation is launched under the guise of a rescue mission. Ships and aircraft scour the surface of the Atlantic, looking for radio buoys or debris. It is a necessary theater. Until the wreck is physically located, the Navy cannot definitively declare the crew dead. They must play out the grim procedural drama, offering false hope to families who are desperate to believe that the submarine is just drifting with a broken radio. It takes 9 days. On June 5, 1968, the Chief of Naval Operations officially declares the USS Scorpion presumed lost. The word presumed is a legal nicety. The reality is absolute. 99 names are moved from the active duty roster to the list of the Eternal Patrol. But finding the Scorpion is not just a matter of closure, it is a matter of national security. The Navy needs to know if the Soviets sank her. They need to know if the nuclear reactor is intact. They need to validate the SOSUS data. The search for the wreck is a triumph of mathematics over mystery. Dr. John Craven, the Navy's chief scientist for special projects, leads the effort. He uses Bayesian search theory, a statistical method that assigns probabilities to different scenarios. He bets on the acoustic data. He trusts the hydrophones that heard the death rattle of the ship. He defines a search box southwest of the Azores, an area of deep ocean far from where the surface ships had initially looked. In October 1968, 5 months after the disappearance, the research ship USNS Mizar lowers a camera sled into the abyss. The water here is over 11,000 feet deep, more than 2 miles down. The cameras drift over the abyssal plain, snapping thousands of grainy, black and white photos of the mud. Then, the strobe lights catch something man-made. It is the sail of the Scorpion. It is lying on its side, detached from the hull, looking like a discarded toy. The cameras continue to sweep the area. They find the bow section, the torpedo room where the flooding likely began. It is separated from the rest of the ship, confirming the violence of the structural failure. They find the stern section, the engine room, telescoped into itself, the hull plating crushed by the immense pressure of the implosion. The wreckage confirms the timeline. The Scorpion did not flood on the surface and sink. She imploded at depth. The debris field is relatively compact, indicating that the ship fell fast and broke up only when the hull collapsed. The physical evidence aligns perfectly with the 22-minute acoustic record. The photos also dispel the Soviet attack theory. There are no torpedo holes in the hull. The damage is inward, compressive, the result of the ocean squeezing the ship to death. The Scorpion was not murdered by an enemy. She was destroyed by her own environment. However, the official investigation that follows reaches a conclusion that is famously unsatisfying. The Navy Court of Inquiry, released in 1969, concludes that the cause of the loss cannot be definitively ascertained. They admit that the most likely cause was a battery explosion followed by flooding, but without recovering the physical hull for examination, they refuse to rule out other possibilities. This ambiguity fuels decades of speculation. Theories about a hot-run torpedo detonating inside the ship or a failure of the trash disposal unit circulate in books and documentaries. But modern analysis, revisiting the acoustic data and the maintenance records, points overwhelmingly back to the battery well. The hydrogen explosion, the fire, the flooding, and the inability to arrest the descent due to obsolete safety systems form the only narrative that fits all the facts. The refusal of the Navy to explicitly blame the reduced availability maintenance program is seen by many families as a final insult. They believe the Navy is protecting its reputation at the expense of the truth. They argue that the Scorpion was sent to sea in an unseaworthy condition, sacrificed on the altar of Cold War operational tempo. The families petition for the investigation to be reopened, citing new analysis of the acoustic tapes. Their requests are denied. The wreck of the Scorpion remains on the seabed today, a rusted steel tomb in the eternal dark. The nuclear reactor sits in the silt, monitored periodically for radiation leaks. It is a quiet, lonely place, visited only by deep-sea robots and the ghosts of the 99. But the legacy of the Scorpion is not found in the silence of the deep. It is found in the rigorous noise of the modern shipyard. The loss of the Thresher in 1963 started the safety revolution, but the loss of the Scorpion in 1968 cemented it. The Navy realized that half measures were fatal. You could not apply safety standards selectively. The SubSafe program became absolute. No submarine was allowed to deploy until every weld, every valve, and every pipe met the highest standards of quality assurance. The concept of reduced availability for a nuclear submarine was effectively banished. The Navy accepted that it was better to have fewer, safer ships than a larger fleet of ticking time bombs. The Scorpion proved that the ocean does not grade on a curve. It does not care about budget cycles or the Vietnam War. If a ship is not ready, the ocean will take it. The phrase, "safety regulations are written in blood," is often used as a cliché, but in the submarine force, it is a literal truth. Every checkmark on a modern maintenance form, every hydraulic emergency valve, every high-capacity air system exists because 129 men died on the Thresher and 99 men died on the Scorpion. The safety of every sailor serving today is purchased with the lives of those who were lost. As we look back on the final 22 minutes of the USS Scorpion, we are left with a story that is devoid of the comfort of heroism in combat. The men of the Scorpion did not die fighting the Soviets. They died fighting a valve that wouldn't close. They died fighting a ballast system that was too slow. They died fighting a budget cut. Yet their heroism is found in their discipline. In those final minutes, falling through the black water, they stayed at their stations. They tried to save the ship until the physics made salvation impossible. They did their duty. The story of the Scorpion is a warning. It reminds us that in the world of high-stakes technology, whether it is space travel or deep-sea exploration, there is no such thing as a calculated risk when the cost of failure is total. There are only safe systems and unsafe systems. The 99 men of the Scorpion are still on patrol, resting in the deep Atlantic. They are the eternal guardians of the standards that keep their successors alive. They are the reminder that the sea is unforgiving, and the price of cutting corners is paid in the most precious currency of all. We remember them not just as victims of a tragedy, but as the men who forced the Navy to look in the mirror and promise, never again. If this deep dive into the hidden history of the Cold War and the engineering of survival meant something to you, we'd be honored to have you with us again. Until next time, stay curious and take good care.